So I get asked by about 80 to 90% of students, how much should I be practicing? And you adult students kind of intrinsically know you're not actually going to get an answer. So when I take a little pause, I get that look from you like, yeah, okay, I know it's a stupid question, which it isn't. It's a perfectly reasonable question, but also it's completely unanswerable for a few reasons, some of which you already know. First of all, it's totally dependent on how far you're wanting to get. I think what you mean to ask, there's a couple different wrong premises here. I think what you're meaning to ask is, within a reasonable amount of time, I want to get pretty proficient at piano where I can sound good, and how much should I be putting in order to get to sounding good within a decent amount of time. So, of course, there's all kinds of undefined terms there. What does it mean to sound good? The truth is, at every step along the journey, you're going to have parts in your playing that are just glaringly, obviously, embarrassingly terrible. I have those today. I plan to have those probably 10 years from now if I make it that long. So that's not going to be an actual thing inside your own head. That is going to be a thing inside the head and ears of other people who listen to you. So you're going to have to, as long as we can agree that we're going based on your friend's assessment of your playing and not your own assessment, then you've got all of the insecurities that go with, well, okay, but my friend says I sound good, but they're always going to say that I sound good. And so what would a stranger think? Okay, so then our assessment is going to be based on, would a stranger think that I know how to play piano? If I just walked up to a piano on the street that was available for playing, could I sit down and play something that would be impressive enough for someone to want to pull out their phone and record me and post it on YouTube? That is a somewhat objective standard. So if that's our standard, what would a stranger think is impressive enough to want to tell somebody that I know how to play the piano? Okay, then how long is it going to take me to get there? And this is where I need to emphasize that we're counting in numbers of hours of focused practice. We're not counting it in numbers of days or years that it's been that your hands have felt keys on a piano. So I get this all the time where students will say, well, I played for 30 years and I still can I have literally no idea how good they're going to be. If you tell me you've been playing for 30 years, that could mean anything. Like there are people who haven't been alive for 30 years who are more awesome than I will ever be in the rest of my life because they just focus practice constantly and they're more talented than I am. We'll get there in a second. Hang on, we'll talk about talent. So we're really talking in numbers of hours of focused practice, not in the amount of time that you've been at your keys. So will it take me a year? No, it could take you a week if you don't sleep. So then we're talking about within the schedule of a person who has to work a 40-hour week. That person is wanting to, with an average amount of talent, get to the place where they could play one song. We're only talking about one song. Not be able to play the piano. No one can play every song. Some people can fake it pretty well, but no one can play all the songs. So getting one song to the level that you could convince a stranger that you know how to play piano, or that they would at least use that term, also not knowing what it meant. There's all kinds of problems with this question, as you can tell. One song within the schedule of a person who has to work a 40-hour work week and is reasonably tired at the end of the day. Then I can maybe say that with an average amount of talent, that person could get to that place within a year. I think everyone kind of has that 6 months to a year in their mind. That's about how long it should take. So then, within 6 months to a year, I want to be at the place where I can play one song reasonably well enough to convince a stranger that I know how to play piano. That's still not specific enough because here's the problem. I can teach a monkey how to play a song, I think. That would be an interesting experiment. And to just like, here, press this button, then this button, then this button, then this button. Yeah, I'm sure I could train a monkey to do that, and they would have no idea of the art behind it or any of the theory or the chords. Of course, we're not naming any of the notes. They don't know their alphabet probably. So then, being able to play a song in front of a stranger and be able to convince them that you know how to play the piano or that you know anything about music, that's relatively easy. With 3 to 4 hours of really hard practice, you could do that. And at the end of it, you would feel like a total loser because you have no idea what you're just pressing buttons in an order. So I think most people, going back to the question, are actually wanting to know how long would I have to practice that within 6 months to a year, I would be able to play in public 3 to 5 songs and have developed skills in there that I can transfer to other songs with an average amount of talent. Okay, so then, well, of course, we can do this all day long. We can pick apart that thing. What is an average amount of talent? Is there such a thing as talent? How much does it play? Okay, so I'm just going to try to give you an answer. I'm going to say, like, an equivalent of 20 minutes a day of practice. It's such a stupid answer because it's such an unanswerable question. Not a stupid question by any means. Everybody has this same question. I want to know the answer to the question too. How much effort do I have to put in order to be able to get something out of this thing? So we've spent all this time and haven't really answered the question, except for me to say, if you're aiming for 20 minutes a day for 3 to 5 days a week, you're going to start to see some results within 6 to 12 months, and you will learn to play some songs probably. However, I would also say that you could spend that amount of time really getting better at piano, and at the end of 6 to 12 months not be able to, conceivably, it's possible that you would not be able to play any song but know a lot of music and be able to play a lot of things, but none of them would actually be songs. It would be hard to do, but again, it's entirely possible. So in my world, like, playing a song really is not a judgment of any kind of a progress at all. So 20 minutes a day for 3 to 5 days a week. Or half hour once every other week. I'm sure I've got students who get that much practice in. Or less. Up to 2 to 3 hours of practice per day. And this is where talent comes in, which honestly, in my opinion, is the desire is evidenced by the desire to practice. And we've got other lessons on what talent is and how to observe and evaluate your own talent. But if you are compelled to continue trying things, like the way that some kids are compelled, despite repeated failure, to play a video game in which they just keep losing over and over and getting killed by the same foe on the same level 100 times over, but they just feel like they have to beat that thing, and they stay there, ignoring all of their hygiene and medical needs until they can fight that boss and defeat it. That right there, I think, would be what the closest evidence of talent that I could think of. So if you like doing this thing, or even if you hate doing this thing, but you just need to, that's a good indication probably of what your talent level is. And for those people, the practice time doesn't matter at all, because I can tell you, 20 minutes a day, every day, or I can tell you 3 hours a day or whatever. They're just going to continue to grind at this thing until they finally conquer it and beat it into submission. So if you're wondering if you have talent, that might be one of the indicators, but talent is not needed at all in order to be able to play this thing and enjoy it. And here we run into the analogy that I probably overuse, but I just haven't found anything else that comes close to demonstrating how we get music into our lives. And that is just that you got to see this as a language. I haven't found very many levels at which this analogy breaks down. So if we just imagine that you're trying to learn Spanish or Portuguese or Italian or some other language, or if you have learned another language, that's really super helpful because you remember currently how difficult that is and all the steps that went into it. And if you have not learned another language recently, then you really undervalue the amount of effort that it took you as a small child to learn that words meant something and that these long strings of sounds could be broken into sentences. The sentences could be broken into words. The words are made up of letters. There are symbols that represent each of the sounds, but symbols sometimes make different sounds depending on the context, and that you would be able to string several of those symbols together, and that represents a sound, which represents an actual thing in the real world or a concept in a person's brain. Like, these are all really, really difficult things to do and take you years and years and years of absolute failure. I mean, kids can't really talk well until they're, I don't know, what, 7, 8, 9, until that they really sound like kids. And even then, you can tell pretty quickly by talking to a 9-year-old that they are a 9-year-old, so just by their vocabulary and word usage. So it takes a really, really long time to learn a new language. Now, you have, of course, the advantage that we've talked about in all the other lessons about being an adult and you being able to see the goal ahead of time, and kids don't have that, and all the other reasons. But if we see this as a language, then we know that there are a few words that are going to be much overrepresented in the normal course of discussion in the language. So some of these articles and there's maybe 50 to 100 words that are going to make up the vast majority of conversation. So if you can really focus on those, wanting to learn a language, kids don't do this, of course, because they're too, I'm going to say dumb, but inexperienced, to as a baby go, oh, yeah, well, I should probably find the 50 most common words. But as an adult, you can take a look at this piano thing and go, there's probably some other keys, some little shortcuts in here, and really focus on that. Now, it's still going to take you just as long to learn that as the next person, but just knowing that those kinds of concepts are in there is going to give you a huge advantage in learning a language or in learning piano. Now, we do have other lessons on shortcuts, but just to give you a couple examples, if you're wanting to learn to read music, then you're going to want to not spend a lot of time trying to be able to list off the letter names quickly, which is usually where we start in our method books and in classical training, is, learning the lines and spaces and all that stuff. More important than that is being able to read intervallically, which is judging the distance based on how far apart they are on the page, and then being able to jump that distance, the representative distance on the piano. So that's playing intervallically. That way you don't have to be processing letters and all that stuff as you're reading through. Again, other lessons on that, so I won't expand on that too much. Or if you're wanting to play chords, then and just like play by ear or play in a usually pop or a rock or a Christian or church band or something like that, then you're going to want to really focus in on one key that is not the key of C and play pattern by pattern inside of the key instead of trying to tackle all 12 keys at the same time. So there are shortcuts out there, and check out some of the other shortcut lessons, and I'll give you some more of those specifically and explain how to do those. But just knowing that those are there, looking for the things that are the hardest to do that seem to keep coming up and grinding away at that's what you should be practicing. So the question isn't really, how much should I be practicing, but what are the things that I should be practicing when I practice? And that's going to make your practice time a lot more efficient. And the last thing I would say about your practice time is don't Google it. Piano teachers are the worst. And if you Google this stuff, you'll come up with answers that are like, well, if you really want to be a good pianist and you don't want to be a mediocre player, then you need to get a good classical teacher and see them once a week for a half hour, and then make sure that you're focusing on fingering and all this other stuff that is technically true. But you dumb-dumbs, you don't, not you, them. No one is going to not be a mediocre player. Everyone is going to be a mediocre player. That person who wrote it is a mediocre player compared to hundreds, thousands, millions of other players in the world. So honestly, I think, and I'm not supposed to say this because I'm a piano teacher, but I think a lot of the emphasis on trying to not be a mediocre player or play the right way or all of that stuff, or that there are no shortcuts to piano. Of course there are, you idiot. All of that stuff is really just a way for piano teachers to legitimize what they do and to maybe, hopefully subconsciously, an effort to bring in more students. No, it's the first one. It's the ego thing. It's that they want to feel, we want to feel like what we do is important, or that it's necessary, or that people who don't follow the rabbit hole as far as we have and as far as we teach other people to do, that's inferior, which is absolutely ridiculous. This is it's just a thing with buttons on it for you to play to your amusement. There's nothing serious about this. It's art or whatever, but really it's just sounds, and we're just organizing different sounds. There's not a whole lot to it. So definitely take all the shortcuts that you can. Be a mediocre player, and then do a bunch of other things mediocrely. Because if you don't, you will just be an expert at one thing and not have a very fulfilled or diversified life with just one experience, in which you will still, at the end of that road, be mediocre. You're not going to be the best pianist in the world. Yeah, I can just say that. And even if you were, then you're only going to be the best pianist in the world for like a day, until some 12-year-old with more talent than you comes up behind you. So don't see this in terms of your comparison to anyone else. Just see it only in comparison to the enjoyment that you get out of this thing. And like all good things, there will be the enjoyment that you get out of it will be determined by the effort that you put into it. But at some point, there's some diminishing returns. And at some point, you go, you know what? I'm really enjoying this thing. I think I'm going to take a break for a while and just enjoy that. And then if you continue to play and you continue to enjoy that stuff and you get bored with it and you're like, man, I really wish I could do this other thing, but I can't. I think I would get enjoyment out of it. Then go study that thing too. But there's no reason at all for, in stupid old music, to have to try to be a well-rounded player, or to not be mediocre, or any of those other monikers that piano teachers are going to try to put on anyone who learns differently than their method. Unless you're wanting to make a living at this thing and be a person who teaches people from diverse backgrounds, and you need to be well-rounded in order to give each person their own little tiny dose of what is appropriate for them. But unless you're wanting to be a piano teacher, I don't see any point in being well-rounded more than you enjoy being well-rounded. Go out and try something else, some other hobbies, because there's tons of fun stuff out there to do. So take all the shortcuts that you can. Embrace that you're going to be a mediocre player like everybody else, and everyone who says they're not mediocre is an idiot. They're full of themselves more than they should be. Don't take that as an insult, and don't ask for any of their advice online from all the music teacher sites that I've seen. It seems to be full of some really great people and some really insecure people who really need to prove to themselves that what they do is legitimate, even though deep down they know that it's not. Okay, go practice.